The palace of the alien queen stood tall on a hill made of shining stones. Its walls glowed faintly under the twin suns of the planet. The queen was known for her wisdom and fairness. Her people respected her deeply, and her young child was the joy of the entire palace. The child's laughter echoed through the halls like music, and many said it brought hope even during hard days. One bright morning, the queen's child went with a group of guardians to visit the forest that grew near the palace lands. The forest was thick with strange trees, their leaves white and silver, and small rivers ran like threads of light. The child loved these walks. The guardians always stayed close, and they thought the forest was safe. But that day something changed. A storm had passed through the night before, and the ground was muddy. Tracks of wild beasts could be seen near the forest edge. The guardians were cautious, but they did not want to ruin the child's joy. The group went deeper than usual. They crossed a small bridge of stone and entered the darker part of the forest where the light of the sun struggled to pass through the leaves. The child ran ahead, chasing a bright insect that glowed in the air. The guardians called out and followed, but when they reached the small clearing, the child was gone. Only the fading glow of the insect remained. Panic filled the group. They spread out, calling loudly, but there was no answer. They searched until the sun set, yet no sign of the child appeared. When the guardians returned to the palace empty-handed, fear spread like fire through the halls. The queen sat upon her throne, her voice trembling as she demanded answers. The guards bowed low, admitting their failure. She sent more soldiers into the forest, armed and ready, but they too returned without finding the child. The queen's sorrow was great. For days, she stood by the balcony of her palace, looking over the land with tearful eyes. Her people gathered outside the palace gates, whispering among themselves. Some believed rival clans had taken the child to weaken the queen. Others feared that wild beasts had carried the young one away. None dared to speak such fears to the queen directly, but all felt the heavy weight of despair. Among the crowd that came to watch the sorrowful queen stood a human traveler named Darren. He had come from a distant starship that often traded with the queen's people. Darren was not tall, nor did he carry the heavy weapons the alien guards bore. His clothing was simple, his bag worn from long journeys. To the aliens, he seemed fragile. Many looked at him with doubt, for they believed humans were weak compared to their strong warriors. Darren, however, did not care for their judgment. He watched the queen from a distance, saw the grief upon her face, and felt a deep stir in his heart. He had no child of his own, but he knew the pain of losing family, for long ago he had lost his younger sister during a storm on his own world. Though he could not bring her back, he had sworn never to ignore the cries of others in need. That night, while the palace slept, Darren walked alone to the edge of the forest. The moonlight of the alien world fell across the leaves, and the forest seemed alive with whispers. He crouched low, studying the mud. His sharp eyes noticed something the alien guards had missed. A small footprint, lighter than those of adults, pressed into the soil. It was partly washed away by rain but still clear to someone who paid attention. Nearby, he saw a broken branch, bent downward as if a small hand had brushed against it. Darren followed the trail for some distance until it vanished among the roots. He marked the place in his mind and returned to the palace at dawn. He stood before the queen and her council. "Your Majesty," Darren said in a firm but respectful voice, "I believe your child is still alive. I have seen signs in the forest that your warriors overlooked. Allow me to search." The council erupted in whispers. Some laughed quietly, calling it foolish that a lone human could succeed where many skilled hunters had failed. One elder stepped forward and said, "Why should we trust a fragile traveler when our strongest cannot succeed?" The queen raised her hand, silencing the hall. Her eyes, tired from nights without rest, studied Darren closely. She saw no armor upon him, no shining weapon, yet she sensed no fear in his voice. "Human," she said, "you are brave to speak such words. But know this. Many have searched and failed. If you go, you may never return." "I understand," Darren replied. "But I cannot stand idle while your child may yet be saved." For a long moment, silence filled the hall. At last the queen nodded. "Very well. You may go. But I will not command others to follow you. You will walk this path alone." Darren bowed deeply. "That is enough. I need no army, only the will to keep searching." The next morning, Darren prepared for his journey. His bag carried simple tools, rope, water, a small blade, and dried food. The alien guards mocked him as he passed. "He will be eaten by beasts before nightfall," one said. Another shook his head. "Humans dream too much. He will not last." But a few among the aliens watched with quiet hope. They had seen how calmly he spoke, how steady his eyes were. Perhaps, they thought, he might find something they had missed. As Darren entered the forest again, he felt the heavy air around him. Birds of strange colors flitted between the branches. Shadows stretched long across the ground. Every step carried risk, but he moved with care, his eyes searching for clues. He knew this would not be an easy journey. Yet in his heart, he carried the memory of his lost sister, and he swore he would not fail another child. Back at the palace, the queen stood upon her balcony once more. She gazed into the distance, where the dark forest lay beyond the hills. In her heart, she did not expect the human to succeed. But as the suns rose higher, a single thought gave her a small spark of hope. Perhaps courage and determination could achieve what strength alone could not. The forest was silent, but somewhere within its depths, the child was waiting. And Darren, the lone human, had begun the search that no other dared to finish. Darren walked deeper into the alien forest, the weight of the task pressing on his shoulders. The sounds of the world around him were both strange and unsettling. Birds with crystal wings sang sharp cries, and insects with glowing bodies buzzed through the air. The trees stretched high like towers, their bark shining faintly as if filled with liquid light. To many it was a beautiful place, but to Darren it was a place of danger where one wrong step could end his life. He paused by a stream where the water flowed cold and clear. He bent down, touched the surface, and then studied the ground nearby. The soil carried many marks. The heavy steps of armored guards had crushed much of it, but here and there, he found lighter impressions, ones that seemed to match the size of a child's feet. He crouched low, brushing the mud with his fingers. He knew he was on the right path. While others relied on strength and speed, Darren relied on patience. He spent hours moving slowly, studying each small sign, piecing them together like parts of a puzzle. His sharp eyes noticed scratches on a stone, perhaps from a small hand slipping while climbing. He noticed broken berries scattered across the grass, as if someone had fallen there. Each detail told him a story of the missing child's journey. As night fell, Darren made a small camp near the roots of a massive tree. He built a fire with dry wood, keeping the flames low so as not to draw too much attention. He ate a little dried food and rested against the tree trunk. In the darkness, the forest came alive with strange sounds. Low growls echoed in the distance, and shapes moved among the shadows. His hand stayed close to the small blade at his side. He knew the beasts of this world were not to be taken lightly. Yet as he looked up at the stars above the trees, he felt calm. He thought of the queen's tearful face, of the child who might still be alive somewhere out there. His heart told him he could not fail. Back in the palace, the queen sat in her chamber, her mind restless. She had given permission for the human to search, but doubt filled her heart. Her people whispered that the human would not survive even a single night. Some even called her foolish for allowing him to try. Yet deep within, she wondered if perhaps the stranger carried something her own warriors lacked. On the second day, Darren rose early and pressed on. The trail grew harder to follow. Rain had washed away many signs, and the forest floor was tangled with roots and leaves. But Darren did not give up. He watched the way branches bent, the way moss was disturbed, the way small stones were scattered. Every detail mattered. By midday, he came upon a patch of ground where strange claw marks cut into the soil. The prints were wide and deep, showing the strength of the beast that made them. Darren crouched low and studied them. The size was large enough to frighten even the bravest warrior. Near the claw marks he saw a single small footprint. His heart raced. The child had been here, moving quickly, perhaps chased. The thought filled him with urgency. He tightened the straps of his bag and moved faster, yet still careful. He whispered to himself, "Hold on, little one. I am coming." Hours passed, and the forest grew darker as heavy clouds rolled across the skies. Rain poured down in sheets, soaking his clothes and making the ground slippery. Darren pressed forward despite the storm. He slid down muddy slopes, climbed over fallen trunks, and crossed streams that threatened to sweep him away. His muscles ached, but his spirit remained unbroken. At one point, he heard a roar in the distance. It echoed through the forest, deep and chilling. Darren froze, his hand on his blade. He listened closely. The roar came again, followed by the cracking of branches. The beast was moving, and it was not far. He crouched low, hiding among the roots of a tree, waiting. Through the sheets of rain, he saw it. A massive creature with scaled skin and eyes that glowed like fire passed between the trees. Its breath rose in clouds of steam, and its claws tore the ground as it walked. Darren held his breath, not daring to move. If the beast noticed him, he would not stand a chance in open fight. The creature sniffed the air, growled, and moved away into the forest. Darren exhaled slowly, relief washing over him. He knew now the kind of danger the child might be facing. The thought filled him with greater determination. By the time the sun set again, Darren reached a wide clearing. In the center stood a broken cart, its wheels shattered, vines creeping over its frame. He studied it closely. It looked as though someone had passed here long ago, but near the cart he found fresh signs. Small handprints pressed into the mud, one on the side of the cart as if the child had used it for support. The discovery gave him hope. He set camp near the cart, building another small fire. As he sat in the glow, he thought of the queen. He imagined the sorrow in her eyes, the way she stood before her people, silent yet strong. He imagined the child, frightened and alone, waiting for someone to come. Darren clenched his fist. He would not fail. That night, as he rested, he dreamed of his sister. He saw her running through a field back on his home world, laughing as the wind lifted her hair. Then he saw the storm, the moment she was taken from him, and the helplessness he had felt. He awoke with tears in his eyes, but also with renewed strength. He whispered into the night, "This time, I will not be too late. The next morning, Darren rose before the first light touched the forest. He followed the trail once more. The signs grew faint, but he noticed them still. A snapped twig, a bent flower, a stone shifted from its place. His patience and focus kept him on the right path. By midday, he reached a narrow canyon. The walls rose steep and sharp, and the air grew colder. The ground was littered with bones, the remains of creatures that had fallen prey to something powerful. Darren's steps slowed. He felt eyes watching him from the shadows. He gripped his blade tightly, ready to defend himself. Then he noticed something. At the far end of the canyon, near a cluster of rocks, a small piece of cloth clung to a thorn. Darren hurried forward and pulled it free. It was soft and finely woven, unlike the rough plants of the forest. He held it in his hand, heart pounding. It could only belong to the Queen's child. Darren knelt, studying the ground around the cloth. He saw fresh prints, both small and large. The child had passed here, but so had the beasts. The chase was close. He knew now the situation was dire. He tightened his jaw, his resolve stronger than ever. Far away, in the palace, the Queen sat once more by her window. She looked to the horizon, where dark clouds still hung over the forest. She whispered to herself, "Where are you, my child?" and her voice broke. Her people continued to doubt, but somewhere in the depths of the wild, Darren pressed on. He had chosen this path not for glory, not for reward, but because his heart could not allow him to do otherwise. Every step he took carried him deeper into danger, yet also closer to the lost child. The forest tested him with storms, beasts, and endless shadows. But the human spirit burned bright, guiding him forward where others had turned back. The search was far from over, but Darren would not stop. Not until he brought the child back to the Queen, safe and alive. The canyon walls loomed high around Darren as he stood with the piece of cloth in his hand. His heart beat fast. The proof was clear now. The Queen's child had come this way, and the beasts that hunted these lands had followed close. The air in the canyon was thick and heavy, carrying the smell of damp stone and something rotten. Bones crunched under his boots as he moved. Each step made him tense, but his spirit did not bend. He pushed forward, careful to stay near the walls where shadows offered cover. His eyes scanned the ground, reading every mark like a page of a book. Large claw prints overlapped the smaller footsteps. The child had been forced to run. Darren imagined the small figure stumbling in fear, pressed forward by the terror of a monster behind. The thought gave him strength. He whispered to himself, "I will not let fear win this time." The canyon grew narrower until only a strip of sky was visible above. Strange vines hung from the rocks, and water dripped down the walls. Darren stopped when he heard movement. A growl echoed through the narrow space, deep and hungry. His grip tightened on his blade. He crouched low and waited. From the darkness ahead, a beast stepped into view. It was one of the hunters of this land, with 4 legs thick as pillars, scales shining wet, and eyes glowing faint orange. Its teeth shone sharp, and its claws scraped the stone floor. It sniffed the air and let out a roar that made the canyon shake. Darren's breath slowed. He knew he could not win in open fight. The beast was larger and faster. Instead, he studied his surroundings. He saw loose stones high on the canyon wall, ready to fall if struck. Slowly, he reached for his rope. Moving carefully, he wrapped one end around a sharp rock and tied it tight. The beast stepped closer, growling, its eyes fixed on him. When it lunged, Darren pulled the rope with all his strength. A cascade of stones fell from above, striking the beast across its back and head. The creature roared in rage and pain, thrashing against the canyon walls. Dust filled the air. Darren ran, slipping between narrow cracks, his heart pounding. He did not look back until the growls grew faint. The beast was trapped under fallen rocks, its roars fading into the distance. Darren leaned against the wall, his chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. He felt fear, but also relief. Once again, he had survived not by strength but by cleverness. He moved forward, deeper into the wildlands beyond the canyon. As he emerged from the narrow pass, the world changed. Before him stretched a vast swamp. The air was thick with mist, and the ground was soft with mud and water. Tall reeds grew in clusters, and strange glowing insects swarmed above the pools. The sound of croaking creatures filled the air. The trail was harder to follow here, but Darren pressed on. He used a stick to test the ground before each step, avoiding pits of deep water that could swallow him whole. He saw small footprints near the edge of the swamp, some pressed into mud, others smudged by water. The child had crossed this place, but the prints wavered as if the small one had been tired. Darren's pace slowed. He could not rush in the swamp, for danger hid beneath the surface. Twice he saw ripples that grew into wide jaws of creatures waiting just below the water. He moved around them with care, always alert, always watching. By midday, the suns broke through the mist, sending shafts of light across the swamp. Darren found a patch of solid ground where reeds grew thick. He sat to drink water and eat a little food. As he rested, he heard a faint sound. At first he thought it was the wind. Then he listened closer. It was a voice, weak and trembling. He stood quickly, his heart racing. He followed the sound, pushing through reeds and mud until he reached a hollow log near the edge of a pool. He bent low and listened. The voice came again, soft and broken, but clear enough. It was the child. Darren called gently, "Do not fear. I am here to help." There was no reply, only silence. He leaned closer and saw nothing inside the log but darkness. Still, he felt sure the child had been there recently. Perhaps the sound was an echo, or perhaps his mind had played a trick. He searched around and found fresh handprints in the mud. The child had rested here, hiding in fear, but had moved again. Though he felt disappointment, Darren's resolve grew stronger. The child was close. He pressed on through the swamp, following the new trail. The day passed with slow progress. By evening, the swamp gave way to a forest of twisted trees. Their branches reached like claws into the sky, and the ground was covered with thick roots and sharp thorns. The air smelled of decay, and the cries of unseen creatures echoed between the trunks. Darren moved carefully, cutting his way through the roots when needed. His clothes were torn, his body scratched, but he pressed forward. In the fading light, he found another sign. A small toy lay on the ground, carved from stone and wood. It was worn but clearly made with care. He picked it up and studied it. The Queen's child must have dropped it. He held it tightly, a sign that he was not chasing shadows but following a real path. Night came quickly in the twisted forest. Darren built no fire, for the danger here was too great. He found shelter between two roots, pulling his cloak around him. The sounds of beasts filled the air, but he forced himself to rest. His dreams were filled with images of the child calling out, reaching for help, and his own younger sister smiling before she was taken by the storm of his past. At dawn, he rose and pressed forward once more. The forest seemed endless, but the trail remained. He found pieces of broken branches, disturbed soil, and faint prints. His sharp eyes noticed what the alien warriors could not. By midday, he reached the edge of a high cliff. Below stretched a valley filled with mist, and beyond that, dark mountains rose like walls against the sky. Darren looked down and saw a narrow path winding into the valley. Near the edge of the cliff, he found another small footprint pressed into soft soil. His heart swelled with hope. The child had crossed here not long ago. The path down was steep and dangerous. Rocks crumbled beneath his feet, and sharp winds whipped against him. He moved slowly, gripping the stone with steady hands. Each step tested his strength, but his will carried him on. When he reached the valley floor, the mist wrapped around him, cold and thick. He could see only a few steps ahead. He relied on his memory of the trail and the signs beneath his feet. Somewhere in the mist, he heard soft crying. His breath caught in his throat. He moved quickly, following the sound, but once again it faded into silence. Still, he refused to give in. The child was near. The valley grew darker as night fell. Darren built a small fire against the rocks, shielding it with stones to keep it hidden. He sat by the flames, holding the toy he had found. He stared into the fire and thought of the queen, waiting with sorrowful eyes, and of the child, frightened and alone. He swore once again that he would not return without success. Above him, stars filled the sky. The wild lands stretched far and wide, filled with dangers and shadows, but Darren's spirit did not waver. He had faced beasts, storms, and endless fear, yet still he moved forward. The signs were clear. The child lived, and Darren would not stop until he found them. The wild lands had tested him, but he had not broken. Instead, he had grown stronger, more determined, and more certain that the human heart could endure what strength alone could not. Somewhere in the mountains ahead, the Queen's child was waiting. And Darren, the lone human, was ready to face whatever came next. The valley was filled with mist that clung to Darren's skin and blurred his sight. Each step he took echoed against the stone walls, and every sound seemed louder in the silence. He carried the toy he had found, holding it tightly as if it gave him strength. His mind was clear now. The child was alive. The trail was steady. The danger was great, but his heart burned with determination. He followed the faint path deeper into the valley. The mist shifted as cold winds moved through the rocks. Strange cries echoed from hidden places, and shadows passed by unseen. Darren kept his blade ready, his eyes sharp. He did not know what awaited him, but he had learned to expect danger with every step. By midday, the valley opened into a wide cavern mouth. The air that drifted from it was damp and heavy, carrying a foul smell. The ground near the entrance was covered with deep claw marks, and broken bones lay scattered across the stones. Darren knelt and studied them. Among the bones he saw something small, a piece of cloth caught on a jagged rock. He lifted it, his chest tightening. It matched the fine cloth of the Queen's palace. The child had been here. He looked into the darkness of the cavern. The growls he had heard before returned, deeper now, echoing from inside. He knew the beasts had made this place their nest. Somewhere within, the child was trapped. Darren stood tall, his fear clear in his mind, but his courage stronger. He whispered, "I will not leave without you." He stepped into the cavern. The walls were wet with slime, and the air smelled of decay. His footsteps splashed in shallow pools of water. The growls grew louder, and soon he saw them. A group of creatures rested near the back of the cave. They were large, with glowing eyes and scales that reflected the dim light. Their claws tore into bones as they fed. Beyond them, in a hollow corner, Darren saw movement. A small figure crouched against the stone, arms wrapped tight around their knees. The child. Their eyes were wide with fear, but they were alive. Darren's heart raced. He could not fight the beasts head-on. To do so would mean certain death. Instead, he studied the cave quickly. To one side, loose rocks hung from the ceiling. To the other, a narrow path led toward the child, hidden by shadows. He formed a plan. From his bag, he pulled a small piece of cloth and wrapped it around a stick. He lit it with a spark, creating a torch. The sudden light caught the attention of the beasts. They growled and turned toward him, their eyes glowing brighter. Darren shouted and waved the torch, stepping back toward the loose rocks. The beasts roared and advanced. With a swift move, he hurled the torch against the wall. Flames burst as dry moss caught fire. The beasts snarled in anger and charged. At that moment, Darren picked up a stone and threw it with all his strength toward the ceiling. The weak rocks cracked, and with a thunderous crash, stones rained down upon the beasts. The cavern filled with dust and roars of pain. Some of the creatures were trapped, others fled deeper into the darkness. The fire burned along the wall, filling the space with smoke. Darren took the chance. He sprinted toward the child, leaping over stones and bones, his heart pounding. The child cried out as he reached them. Darren dropped to his knees, his voice calm but firm. "Do not be afraid. I am here to take you home." The child's small hands clutched at his arms. Their eyes were filled with tears, but they nodded. Darren lifted the child into his arms. The weight was light, but the responsibility heavy. He turned back toward the cave entrance. The beasts were not finished. One of them broke free from the fallen rocks, its body bleeding but its eyes burning with rage. It roared and charged, shaking the cavern floor. Darren ran, clutching the child close. The ground shook under his feet. He reached the mouth of the cave just as the beast leapt. With no time to think, Darren rolled to the side, clutching the child tight. The beast slammed into the stone wall, sending shards flying. Darren stumbled to his feet and sprinted into the mist of the valley. Behind him, the creature roared again, forcing its body through the narrow entrance. Darren's breath came fast. He had no strength left for tricks. He ran along the path, searching for escape. Ahead, he saw a fallen tree bridging a narrow gap between cliffs. He ran toward it, the child in his arms. The beast closed in, its growls shaking the ground. He reached the fallen tree and stepped onto it. The wood creaked under his weight. The gap below was deep, filled with sharp rocks. The beast roared and leapt onto the bridge behind him. The wood groaned, ready to snap. Darren kept moving, each step shaking the bridge. With the last of his strength, he reached the other side and leapt onto solid ground. The beast followed, but the bridge could not hold. With a loud crack, the tree split, sending the monster crashing into the depths below. Its roar faded as it fell, leaving only silence behind. Darren collapsed to his knees, still holding the child close. His chest heaved, his body weak, but relief washed over him. He looked into the child's frightened eyes and gave a small smile. "You are safe now." The child clung to him, their tears wetting his shoulder. For the first time since he had begun this journey, Darren felt true hope. He had found the child. The hardest part remained, but he would not fail. That night, Darren built a small shelter near the valley edge. He gave the child food and water, speaking softly to calm them. The child's voice was weak, but they whispered, "Will we go home?" "Yes," Darren answered, his voice steady. "I will take you back to your mother." The child closed their eyes and rested against him. Darren stayed awake, watching the darkness, his blade in hand. He knew more dangers lay ahead, but his spirit was stronger now. The life in his arms gave him purpose greater than fear. Back in the palace, the queen sat by her throne, her heart heavy. She had not slept for many nights. The whispers of her people reached her ears. Many believed the child was gone forever. Yet she could not let go of hope. She looked toward the forest in the distance and whispered, "Come back to me." At that same moment, Darren sat under the stars, holding the sleeping child. His body was weary, but his resolve unbroken. He had faced the beasts, risked his life, and endured the wild lands. He had found the child, and nothing would stop him from bringing them home. The journey was not over, but the most important step had been taken. The rescue was complete. Now came the struggle of the return. The journey back from the valley was even more difficult than the path to it. Darren carried the child carefully in his arms. The child's small frame trembled from fear and exhaustion. Mist clung to their clothes, and cold wind cut through the trees. Darren's own muscles ached from days of walking, climbing, and fighting, yet he refused to rest for long. Every step forward brought them closer to safety. The path was narrow and winding, filled with loose stones and hidden holes. Darren moved slowly, carefully testing each step before placing his weight. Once, he slipped, and his heart nearly stopped. He caught himself with one hand, gripping the child tightly with the other. The child's eyes were wide, filled with trust and fear. "Do not worry," Darren whispered. "I will not let anything happen to you." The night fell quickly in the alien world. Stars glimmered faintly above the trees, casting a soft light on the path. Darren found a small hollow under a rock and decided to rest. He made a tiny fire to warm them both, careful to keep the flames low. The child, finally feeling a sense of safety, leaned against him and closed their eyes. Darren watched the fire, thinking of the queen and the palace far ahead. He imagined her waiting, her eyes filled with worry, hoping for a miracle. When dawn arrived, he rose and pressed on. The path led them out of the valley and into the edge of the forest. Signs of the palace lands appeared in the distance, distant hills, shining stones, and the faint glow of the palace walls. Relief filled him, yet he knew the journey was not over. Wild creatures still roamed, and the terrain remained challenging. The child stirred and looked up at him. "Are we close to home?" they asked softly. "Yes," Darren replied, smiling gently. "Soon, you will be with your mother." He could see the child relax slightly, their small hands clutching his shirt. Darren's heart warmed. Every step he had taken, every danger he had faced, had led to this moment. The child's safety was his reward, and nothing could diminish his determination. As they neared the palace, Darren noticed a group of soldiers stationed along the outskirts. Their eyes widened in surprise at the sight of him. Whispers spread quickly. A lone human had emerged from the wild lands, carrying the queen's child. Many could not believe it. They had searched for days and failed, yet here was a human returning victorious. Darren did not stop to explain. He hurried forward, moving toward the main gates. The child clung to him, exhausted but alive. Guards rushed forward, unsure whether to be afraid or help. When they saw the child, they stepped aside, allowing Darren to pass. The palace gates opened, and the glow of the walls welcomed them. Inside, the queen waited. Her heart had ached for days, and she had not dared to hope. But as the figure of Darren appeared, carrying her child safely, her breath caught. Tears filled her eyes. She ran forward, arms outstretched, and embraced her child tightly. The small figure hugged back, trembling but safe. The hall fell silent. The queen looked at Darren, her eyes filled with a mixture of relief, gratitude, and wonder. You brought them back," she said, her voice soft but trembling. "I did what I could," Darren replied humbly. "The child is safe now." The queen's tears fell freely. She looked around at her council and the gathered people. They, too, stared at Darren with amazement. The strongest warriors, trained for years, had failed to find the child. Yet a human, considered fragile and weak, had succeeded where they could not. "You have shown us something we did not understand," the queen said, her voice strong but full of emotion. "Courage, determination, and heart can surpass strength. You have proven that humanity has a place among us, and that greatness comes in many forms." Darren bowed respectfully, feeling the weight of her words. He did not seek praise or reward. His goal had always been simple: save the child and return them to safety. Yet in the eyes of the aliens, he had done more than that. He had shown them a new perspective on what it meant to be brave. The child ran to their mother, holding her tightly. "I was so afraid," they whispered. The queen stroked their hair, speaking gently to calm them. Darren watched the reunion, feeling a sense of completion he had never known before. Later, in the quiet of the palace gardens, the queen approached Darren once more. "You risked your life for my child," she said. "You have earned my gratitude and the respect of my people. We owe you more than words can express." Darren shook his head. "I do not need reward," he said. "I only did what I could. Every child deserves to be safe, and I could not ignore that." The queen smiled, her eyes still glistening with tears. "Perhaps that is why humans are special," she said softly. "You see the world differently. You have heart, and heart can overcome what strength cannot." Word of Darren's courage spread quickly throughout the palace and beyond. The aliens, who had once doubted humans, now regarded them with respect. Soldiers, scholars, and children alike told stories of the human who had ventured into the wild lands and returned with the lost child. The queen held a small ceremony in honor of Darren, declaring that humanity had earned a place of trust and friendship among them. Despite the praise, Darren remained humble. He did not ask for titles or wealth. His joy was in the safety of the child and the knowledge that he had made a difference. He spent time teaching the child small lessons about courage and patience, and they listened with wide eyes, inspired by his stories of determination. The palace, once shadowed by sorrow, now overflowed with joy. The child laughed again, filling the halls with the music of life. The queen, though still cautious, smiled more freely, knowing her family was safe. And in quiet moments, she looked at Darren with deep respect, seeing not a fragile stranger, but a hero whose heart had carried more strength than the strongest warrior. Seasons changed, and life in the palace returned to its normal rhythm. Yet the memory of the human who braved the wild lands remained. Darren stayed among them for a time, helping to teach the children courage and careful thinking. He shared knowledge of distant worlds and ways to survive through patience and observation. The aliens learned that strength was valuable, but it was not the only path to greatness. When the day came for Darren to leave, the queen presented him with a simple gift, a small medallion engraved with symbols of protection and courage. She placed it around his neck. "Carry this with you," she said, "as a reminder of what you have done and the bond between our peoples." Darren accepted it with gratitude. "I will always remember this place and these people," he said. "And I will remember that courage and heart can change everything." With that, he departed from the palace, walking through the gates and into the wider world. Behind him, the queen watched with tears in her eyes. Her child ran to her side, laughing and safe. The people of the palace cheered, not just for the child, but for the human who had shown them a new way to see strength and courage. Darren's journey had begun with a single step into a forest, guided only by hope and determination. He had faced dangers greater than most could imagine and had returned victorious, proving that heart and will could overcome fear and challenge. In the end, the queen's eyes filled with tears not only for the return of her child but for the realization that greatness could come in forms unexpected, and that humanity's spirit could inspire even the most advanced of civilizations. The story of Darren, the human who brought back the lost child, became a legend told for generations. Children would grow up hearing of his courage. Soldiers would learn that wisdom and patience could defeat brute force. The Queen's people would never forget that even a single human, with heart and will, could change the fate of a kingdom. And somewhere far across the stars, Darren continued his journey, carrying with him the quiet knowledge that even the smallest acts of courage could leave a mark upon the universe.